It's my pleasure to introduce Nancy Swift-Furlotti as the Zurich Series Lecturer for 2020. We had planned to all be in Zurich together today. Actually, today would be the day that Nancy would be giving her lectures in Zurich. This is an annual event that's sponsored by Chiron Publications and the International School of Analytical Psychology in Zurich. But this year, because of the pandemic, we were not able to meet in person, so we're doing this substitute event in its place. Nancy Swift-Furlotti is speaking for, as she will explain, is speaking for Ariel Shalit, who was scheduled to be the lecturer, but very sadly, he passed away before he could take part in this series. And so Nancy stepped in for him, and she will explain, I'm sure, finished his work, and it has now been published. And she would have been in Zurich to give the lectures in Ariel's place today. Nancy Swift-Furlotti is a Jungian analyst. She did her analytic training primarily at the C.G. Jung Institute of Los Angeles, where she also served as a president for a period of time. And she also studied at the Mary Louise von Franz Zentrum in Switzerland. She was a founding member and a past president of the Philemon Foundation, which was responsible for publishing in 2009 Jung's Red Book, very important event in the history of analytical psychology. She is currently on the board of the Pacifica Graduate Institute, and she's a founding member of the recently established Kairos Film Foundation that oversees the movies A Matter of Heart and The World Within, the Remembering Jung video series, and is the co-chairman of the C.G. Jung Professorial Endowment at UCLA. She's also on the board of the Mercurius Prize Committee. She's published numerous articles and book chapters on various topics, including, importantly, Mesoamerican mythology, and has a special interest in the environment. She has an interest in the topic of narcissism and, of course, the famous Red Book of C.G. Jung. With Ariel Shalit, she co-edited a book several years ago entitled The Dream and Its Amplification. And through her publishing company, Recollections, she brings into print unpublished works by first-generation Jungians, such as Erich Neumann. So Nancy has been very active and very busy in the Jungian community, and it's my great pleasure to now turn our session over to her, and she will deliver what would have been one of her Zurich lectures, and I'm glad that we can do it this way. Nancy, please take over.
Thank you very much, Murray. And it's nice to be here, although I would have preferred being in Zurich in person. But here we are in a very changed world. Sure, I'm going to be giving Ariel's first lecture in the book. And I want to, first of all, start with a photograph of him that was taken quite a number of years ago at the Liberty Bell. And I thought that was appropriate. He has been liberated. So this book is called A Story of Dreams, Fate, and Destiny. The dream is the doorway that stands between the unconscious and our consciousness. By opening that door, we are able to discover another world entirely, one that expands far into the past, traverses our present, and extends into the unfathomable future. It is a world that we were immersed in as children, then mostly grew to forget, until one of the many figures that reside there knocks on our door to grab our attention. From that moment on, life is different. It becomes richer, of a deeper hue, mysterious, terrifying, but enticing. What it reveals are images with strange symbols and figures of unknown people, animals behaving oddly, monsters, angels, all interspersed with the memories of our daily lives. These fill the myths of past, present, and future, not expressing linear time, but circular time, where all is pertinent at any one moment. As Jung pointed out, space as well as time and matter are relative to the psyche. In other words, they are to a certain extent psychic functions. It is an underworld that speaks in images, where images represent our emotions, thoughts, and inspirations. If we learn to understand this strange language, the language of the dream, we are able to unravel the mystery of our fate, our personal and collective myth, and follow our destiny. Our dream process allows us to collect the precious moisture from the deep well in the unconscious that nurtures our soul and helps us make the right decisions when fate leads us to the crossroads of our life to choose how we will live it as our destiny. As Jung reflected, I understand how important it is to affirm one's own destiny. In this way, we forge an ego that does not break down when incomprehensible things happen. An ego that endures the truth, and that is capable of coping with the world and with fate. In this beautiful book, let me see. Let me see how to move forward on this. Okay. There we go. This is the book. In this beautiful book, Arel Shalit takes us on a journey from ancient history, beginning with the first documented dream, that of Gilgamesh, to Adam and Eve and the serpent, to Joseph in Egypt as the Pharaoh's dream interpreter, through ancient Greece to the Asclepion, to Swedenborg's visions, to our world today through the eyes of Freud, Jung, and science, and finally, to the process of active imagination to reveal the workings of Mercurius and the emerging transcendent function. Arel moved between cultures, adding historical accounts and the many customs of working with dreams. Our long history of how humans have paid close attention to this constant phenomenon for thousands of years. Scattered throughout the pages are engaging stories, legends, myths, and the roots of words that take meaning deeper. The chapters include dreams, historical dreams, and the dreams of his patients. He works them, showing us how to squeeze the precious liquid from each one that can lead to a resolution of opposites and a state of understanding so profound and sometimes so simple that we witness how wholeness emerges from the psyche through the transcendent function. This is a rich and poetically written book, a reminder of the foundational work that leads to our greater consciousness, the goal of individuation. Aurel Shalit was asked to participate in the Zurich lecture series, which included the publication of his lectures as a book. He accepted with the proviso that if he did not survive to fulfill this obligation, I would take over the task for him, which of course I agreed to do. Aurel suffered with terminal cancer for a number of years, and true to his character, he made sure his lectures were pulled together as he wanted them to be, pouring into them all his remaining energy. He left notes for me to complete what he couldn't. What is striking is that this last book of his 11th book, circles back to his beginning and weaves through to the end again. It is appropriate that the book is titled A Story of Dreams, Fate, and Destiny. Somehow he knew years before that his life would be foreshortened. Of course, it does not surprise all who knew him. He touched the moisture of each of his dreams. He worked twice as hard, making sure he packed his life with a full load, and he succeeded. Many years before his diagnosis, he was faced with the God of greater wills in a dream and knew on a deep level that he had no choice. His remaining life was not his own. This was fate. He was, quote, caught like a shirt caught in a closed drawer. His destiny reflected how he manifested that sorrowful fate in a noble and compassionate way. So this lecture is called A History of the Dream, Fate and Destiny from Gilgamesh to Jung. And I'm actually going to be reading half of it. History in Greek means narrative, and to search and retrieve, to find out, which is up to the histor, the wise and learned person, to do. The wisest we can try to do is perhaps to search and find out about the wisdom in the narrative of dreams and dreaming. This can clearly not be the history of the facts that we perceive and register in our conscious daytime accounts. Rather, it must be the history of the muse Clio, patroness of historical poetry, who will search and retrieve, in French, trouver, to find, as does the troubadour, who searches for the fragments to be united into his or her personal composition. Clio remembers, retrieves, and reinterprets history, like the troubadour's adaptation of the ballad. This is, then, the history or the narrative of fate and destiny, so well expressed in the words of the ghost Clytemnestra. But before we arrive at her appearance as a ghost, let me remind you that Clytemnestra, which means the noble mistress, married Agamemnon after he had killed her first husband and their child. She then plotted with her present lover, Aegisthus, to kill Agamemnon, now turned husband, while she herself single-handedly killed his concubine, Cassandra. Cassandra, she who entangles men, she who plays such an essential role in the fate of men, blessed with the gift of prophecy, she was cursed by mistrust. Men would simply not believe her warnings, such as the deceitful Trojan horse, and therefore, in disbelief of the priestess, they would fall victim to their fate. And as for Cassandra, she who ensnarls men, helplessly unable to prevent her own tragic fate, she was, as I said, killed by Clytemnestra. And if you still follow the turns of mythical genealogy, Murderous Clytemnestra paid dearly as well, slain by her son Orestes and her amber-shining, golden-haired daughter Electra. And so we got our Jungian Electra complex to compensate for the loss of Oedipus to Freud. By the way, amber, or Electra in Greece, is the raw organic manifestation of the archetypal, electrifying, radiating force of nature. Mythological Electra is an archetypal image that is impalpable, vibrant, and treacherous. It's a treacherous force. And the actress, Irene Papas and Lydia Koniordu, are electrifying personifications of that archetypal force. In Asclepius' Orestian play, The Libation Bearers, Clytemnestra dreams that she gave birth to a snake who, when she nurses it, tears her breast, sucking blood along with the milk. Her son Orestes interprets it. I am the snake. I will be the one to kill her and fulfill the dream. Without challenging Orestes' interpretation of the dream, which obviously fell on fertile ground, perhaps serving as a self-fulfilling prophecy, it may furthermore be that giving birth to that double-edged transformative force called snake, that ancient serpent called the devil, as it says in Revelation 12:9, whose Hebrew name, Neshustan, refers both to divination, Nishus, and to Satan, the devil, Diabolos, throwing to the sides, as in the tree of knowledge, knowing the one from the other, as in diagnosis. To give birth to or to instigate the snaky process of a differentiating consciousness violently tears asunder the sense of a nurturing primary self, the wholeness so well rounded in the breast with a nipple in its center. This brief diversion leads us back to the Furies, in which the ghost of Clytemnestra appears to her son Orestes in a dream, and she calls out, "For the sleeping mind has clear vision, but in the daytime the fate of mortals is unforeseeable." This lecture is, in fact, an elaboration of this statement by Clytemnestra's ghost. As we travel the path of our lives, the contours of our character is sometimes a mere reflection of fate, which, like a tiptoeing shadow, taps us from behind, whom we rarely turn around to reflect upon, while in the dream, fate's wandering phantom may leave us no rest. Not only may the events of one's lifetime be fateful, but the life in which one happens to live is determined by fate. As Erich Neumann says, time itself is fate, and its course is what determines humanity. By sharing with you a narrative of historical dreams, from Gilgamesh and Nebuchadnezzar to Swedenborg, Dora, and Jung, I want to call attention to the dream and its images along the nocturnal axis that leads us from fate to destiny. And this is the subtitle of my lecture, rather than the recorded history of daytime data. We perceive reality by the sharpness of our vision, at least so we think. But the eyes of daylight are not good enough to conceive and envision our fate. To penetrate the clouds that blur our vision and to catch a glimpse of the fates, we weave and spin the patchwork of our destiny. We turn to the dreaming soul. Since the dawn of mankind, the dream is like a myth, a mythos, a mouth that gives expression to the voice of fate and destiny. Through the dream, we recognize that we are touched by the reality called psyche. Fate is something brought forth by the capital Other. Gods, God, nature, constitution, extreme trauma. Fate is that which is spoken and determined, the lot allocated to us by the gods. Fate is not created by man, but man must often carry his or her fate, sometimes pay dearly for it. At other times, resist or fight it, or try to escape it. Oedipus, for one, seeks to flee his fate. Now, who can blame him for being struck by horror upon hearing the words of the Pythia, the oracle at Delphi, pronouncing his ill-fated act of patricide and mother love? Toward the end of his life at Colonus, he pleads innocence. How can he be blamed, he wails, for bearing out a fate determined yet before he saw the light of day? And yet, were he not in the grip of his complex, he may have remembered that he turned to the oracle in the first place, wondering if his parents in Corinth, kind Periboia and mild-tempered King Polybus, really are his parents. But hearing his fate pronounced, he forgets his very query, and a slave unto his complex, he thoughtlessly runs off, only to become captive of the very fate he wished to escape. Insofar as the oracle foretells our fate through the dream, we may become partners in our destiny by attentive listening. In destiny, predetermined fate unites with one's prospective destination. Destiny means the place for which one is bound. And along the path of life, one may determine its meaning and purpose, and sometimes at the crossroads, even its course and direction. In the oldest preserved myth, the Gilgamesh epic, we are told one of humanity's initial dreams. This initial dream of man was born out of the myth Muthos mouth of King Gilgamesh and midwifed by Ninsun, goddess of wisdom, 4,000 years ago at the cradle of civilization along the rivers of Euphrates and Tigris in Mesopotamia, which in fact means the land between the rivers, approximately today's Iraq. Written in cuneiform letters on 12 clay tablets, the epic was discovered in the 19th century in King Assurbanipal's libraries at Nineveh. The epic tells about the hero, King Gilgamesh's quest for immortality. In other words, his desire to remain in the realm of the gods, rather than accepting the fate of being immortal, with the weaknesses and limitations it entails to be human. 2/3 divine, 1/3 human. His strength is exceptional and his beauty magnificent. 11 cubits, a cubit is the length from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger, was his height. The form of his body none can match. But hubris makes him an oppressive and arrogant ruler of the people of York. The gods sent him Enkidu, primal man, born and raised in the wilderness, as devoted companion on his journey. When finally receiving the elixir of youth, a snake, here comes the snake, eats the plant of rejuvenation and eternal youth, whereby Gilgamesh returns home, painfully empty-handed, now more a man, less of a god. And so at the beginning of his journey, as the sun of civilization slowly dawns at the eastern shores of the rivers, where agricultural surplus is traded for metal, timber, and precious stones, Gilgamesh tells his mother and us, last night I saw a dream. There were stairs in the heavens, and one fell down to me. I tried to lift it, but it was too heavy. I tried to move it, but could not remove it. I bent over it as over a woman and put it at your feet. And you yourself put it on a par, on equal footing with me. Gilgamesh, who in a Promethean manner holds within his name that of the Sumerian god of fire, Jibil, the fire of emerging consciousness, turns to Ninsun, the wise goddess, queen of the wild cow, versed in all knowledge, whose son he is. And she interprets his dream and tells him, your equal is the star of heaven. He is a strong companion, one who helps a friend in need. He is the strongest on the step, and his strength is as strong as that of the host of heaven. That you bend over him as over a woman means that he will never forsake you. This is the meaning of your dream, asserts Ninsun, and I can only appreciate the goddess's wise interpretation. The star is the companion who wanders with him. And what is that star, if not our fate? The fate sometimes thought to be determined by the star under which we are born. Later, his companion star is personified by Enkidu, Gilgamesh's fate embodied as nature's shadow, a fate too heavy to carry and too heavy to remove. Fate can often enough neither be escaped nor appeased, and sometimes without seeming reason, fate forsakes. The companion star has shut its guiding, guarding eye. At most, fate can be bent over and embraced, contemplated and revered at the feet of the goddess of wisdom. Gilgamesh tells his mother, I saw another dream, and it is the same dream, but in place of the precious stone, the star of fate, there is an axe. Since there can be no unity without duality, division, and dialogue, crucial dreams often turn up in pairs. It is as if even the dream needs an other, as if life, in order to be lived, requires a companion, a fellow traveler, that other who does not abandon or forsake us, whether that other is personal or transcendent. Without the other, whether an outer or an inner other, loneliness and alienation overcome us. And so the axe in Gilgamesh's second dream is the tool with which, as Jung says, one clears the woods, letting light in. The untouched virgin forest of unconsciousness is acted upon, something all too cruelly, to let the light of day enter. No longer subject solely to divine fate, the unconscious nature, a developing, discriminating consciousness, may now throw new light, and so Gilgamesh cuts the cedar tree in the forest. And there in the forest, before his eyes, appears Ishtar, the greatest of goddesses, light of heaven, shepherdess of land, leader of hosts, opener of the womb. These are her epithet: goddess of love, war, and fertility, shining, electrifying in her nature's beauty as she moves with the rising sun. Into her bosom, the vulnerable young gods are seduced. This is the fate of Tammuz, her son lover, who lends his name to the Hebrew month at summer's peak, who is drawn into death by Ishtar's devastating heat and passion. Unable to survive nature's growth in springtime, the young male gods die in early summer. Gilgamesh rejects Ishtar. How many a man does not save his life by avoiding being caught in the deadly web of the goddess, but thus dying the death of his heart and his soul? Yes, in her suffering, Gilgamesh comes to Ishtar's aid. With his axe, he strikes the serpent at the root of the cedar tree, scares away the frightening bird and its crown, and petrifies Lilith, the demon of the night. And with his axe, he cuts down the tree and carves a throne and a bed for Ishtar. He knows to pay her tribute. The fateful godly star, God and star, the precious stone of heaven, written in the same cuneiform sign. And her very name tells us who she is. Ishtar, or Astarte, her name is cast by the Semitic words seter and stira, secret and contradiction. She is the goddess of secrecy and contradiction that consciousness can hardly bear. Yet she keeps coming back, reappearing not only as goddess of old, Ishtar, Ashtoreth, and Astarte, then through biblical Esther, onward to the shining European Ostara, goddess of springtime. Saved, so tells us the legend, by a bird whose wings had frozen in the winter's cold, and so she could be celebrated at the vernal equinox, when the day of spring is as long as winter's night. And she is goddess of Austra, the shining eastern kingdom of Austria. But as the sun travels across the sky from east to west, the star of Ishtar reappears in astrology, astronomy, and astronauts, not to speak of the ravening female mammal's lust of springtime that stirs the passions and moves into action, Ostros, of ostrogenic fame. When the patriarch Adam was born, so tells the legend, a star stood still in the east and swallowed 4 stars at the 4 points of the compass. The one star of monotheism incorporated the idols and the stars that populated the sky of polytheistic worship. This is as well the star that guides the 3 magi, the wise men of the east, to the house of the newborn child. And as Jung says, the star is a transcendent totality, and it is the human soul, which he compares with the spectacle of the starry heavens at night, for the only equivalent of the universe within is the universe without. And the star points to the world above and to the world below, to divinity and to reality, as the equilateral triangles that make up the Star of David. When a man deviates from the way of the stars, the guiding star becomes ill-starred and disaster follows. For instance, in the persecutory fate of the deadly yellowing, when the star has to be forcefully carried as a compulsory badge. So we find Gilgamesh at the height of conflict and union between fate and nature, and consciousness and culture, between the star-like patterns of the self and the cutting crafts of the ego. Only 100 kilometers or so northwest of Gilgamesh, ruler of Uruk, but a millennium and a half later, 600 BCE, we arrive at Babylon, where Nebuchadnezzar had been appointed king after his father's death. He is a gigantic portrayal of the archetypal struggle between divinity and man, fate and destiny, arrogance and defeat. Following the downfall of Nineveh, his one hand rebuilds the city and the civilization of Babylon. His other hand destroys the temple and the walls of Jerusalem 4 centuries after it was built by Solomon. Nebuchadnezzar's fate brought inevitable defeat. Only if he would have known to read the writing on the wall could he have changed his destiny. The contours of his calling are outlined in his remarkable name, which means Nabu, the god of writing and of wisdom, protects my boundary stone. Nabu is biblical Nebo, which becomes Navi, the Hebrew word for prophet. Nabu is the god of wisdom and writing, possibly the ingredients of prophetic mediation between divine fate and human destiny. The wisdom of writing marks the transition from dwelling in, as Chaim Potok says, the obscurity of the past, into history as a living record of the cultures of man. Nabu protects the boundary stone, of which Hermes becomes the pantheonic epitome. This is the boundary stone that divides and separates what must be divided and separated so that it can be transgressed. This is the boundary between human and divine, archetypal and personal, consciousness and the unconscious, between what is exposed and that which is out of sight. Hermes is the only wayfarer who descends into the netherworld, neighborhood of souls, and then freely re-enters the earthly province of man. He is our companion traveler. When disregarded, he abandons us to loss of soul and to alienation. He then plays his tricksterish games, embarrassing us as he puts on his Freudian slippers, saying out loud what we barely wanted to whisper. If, on the other hand, we respect Hermes, look and look again, looking in and out and beyond, then he will put on his spectacles and bring us the gifts of insight, hermetically interpreting the messages hiding in the blank spaces behind the straight lines of rationality. Come a day, and Nebuchadnezzar tells his sorcerers, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit is troubled. And he demands they interpret his dream without even telling it to them. A somewhat infantile demand, even for a king, and a bit too much, even for a king's magicians. Thus he threatens to cut them in pieces and turn their houses into dunghills. He is not yet aware that sliced up shadows tend to rise like phantoms from the dungeon. And so Daniel is called upon, and in a vision of the night, God reveals the mystery of the dream to him. Daniel dreams the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. a good suggestion for dream interpreters. Dream your patient's dreams. And in their dream, Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar's, what will be has been revealed. And this is the dream that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed, but did not tell as told by Daniel. You looked, O king, and there before you stood a great statue or image of extreme brightness, awesome in appearance, the head of pure gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet of iron and of clay. And then a stone was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue, and the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were broken to pieces and became like the worthless straw on a threshing floor in summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the stone that struck the statue, the image, became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar that his kingdom, his power, his strength, and his glory come from God. You are the head of gold, he says. Then there will arise a kingdom of silver, inferior to yours, and yet another one of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. Then a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, strong, oppressive, crushing, and shattering. However, partly clay and partly iron, it will be divided. Powerful yet frail. Then the eternal kingdom of heaven will crush and put an end to all of these kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar's dream brings us into the conceptual realm of historical account. Daniel interprets the four metals of the statue as four successive kingdoms. And in the history of this archetypal dream, non-psychological interpreters have seen it not as a link in the history of the dream, but a dream that links the history of worldly empires. Thus, it has been perceived as a prediction of the historical succession from the kingdom of Babylon to Medo-Persia and Greece and on to Rome, from which the kingdom of God would rise again. Other scholars have compared the dream to Hesiod's stages in the moral decline of mankind, from the painless, peaceful age of gold to the age of silver and the age of bronze. From a stage of peace and harmony, the blessed mortals come to experience extended infancy and childhood and brief maturity. And then man becomes increasingly engaged in strife and war. Then comes the stage of heroes, which turns to the age of iron, as toil and labor, pain and sorrow, social breakdown, and destructive warfare become the lot of man. Invisible gold turns to silvery reflection, to artistic and artisan bronze and craftable iron, in a relentless process of increasing functionality and continually stronger ego, until the ego swells and returns to the breakable earth from which divinity is reborn. Such is the process of dismemberment, the cutting into pieces with which Nebuchadnezzar hastily threatens, the dismemberment whereby archetypal material is broken down, divided into complexes as a necessary passage toward its assimilation into the human ego. And while the life of ego is transient and breaks down into earth, the divine essence within the archetypal nucleus transcends the short-lived ego. We find the divine stone, not cut by human hands, as the dream describes, as the black stone in the holy shrine of the Kaaba, the cube at Mecca. The foundation stone at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, from which says the legend, the world was created. And Moses breaking the stone tablets at Mount Sinai, the inevitable breaking down of the archetype and divinity when touching human ground, however high the mountain rises. And the stone Omphalos in Delphi at the navel of Mother Earth, from which the prophetess drew her oracles. And Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection at the rock of Golgotha. Golgotha meaning skull in Aramaic and Hebrew, because at Golgotha humans were stoned to death. The stone with which man destroys man is the stone by which man's kingdom of arrogance is destroyed, and it is as well. The philosopher's stone from which life may be renewed. In the meantime, Nebuchadnezzar has not been attentive to Nabu, the boundary protecting god of wisdom and writing. Arrogantly, he erects a golden statue and dictates that it be worshipped. Daniel's 3 pious companions refuse and are punished, thrown into the fiery furnace, yet they remain unharmed, not a hair on their head hurt by the fire. And in the flames appears yet another one, it says, who looks like a son of the gods. They challenge, as Ettinger says, the arbitrary authority of power. Nebuchadnezzar has arrogantly identified with the divine, greedily grabbing godliness for himself. But seeing the wonder in the flames, Nebuchadnezzar recognizes defeat, and he somehow repents, and we arrive at his second dramatic dream. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, at the center of the world, and its height was great. The tree grew, and it reached to heaven, and it was visible to the end of all the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and there was food for all. The wild beasts found shade, and the birds dwelt in its boughs, and all flesh was fed from it. And behold, a watcher came down from heaven and cried out, "Cut down the tree, cut off its branches, shake off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee its shade, and the birds its branches. But leave the stump of its roots in the ground, fettered with iron and bronze. And let it eat with the beasts the grass of the earth. Let its heart be changed from man's, and let a beast's heart be given to him. And let 7 seasons pass over him." A tree in the midst of the earth at the center of the world, reaching up to heaven. Is this the world tree as a link between the transcendent heavens and earthly domain and the netherworld? The world tree draws its fiery energy from the roots of the rhizome, the underground stem, rocketing into the sky until it reaches its all-embracing crown, touching the image of the inverted tree with roots in heaven, so that they mirror each other by reflection along the celestial waterline, bestowing upon the archetypal idea its material garment and substantiating the spirit. Why cut it down? Cut its branches? Why scatter its fruit? Is this tree another Tower of Babel? Another world.com? Another one of man's inflated acts of challenging the gods? Is this the divine revenge of Gilgamesh's axe that cuts the tree to bring light? The classic case of megalomania, says Jung in reference to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar's megalomania is punished with the madness of a beast for 7 years. While he perhaps did feel remorse, it seems atonement requires more. Sometimes it is just too late. Sometimes there may be no amnesty, even though that contradicts our ethical dictum. Sometimes agonizing penalty of one's deeds must be borne. There are crimes from which even the hard work of repentance does not liberate. The crimes of deception that claim, for instance, that Arbeit macht frei, work liberates, without telling the truth that the work implied only liberates from human dignity and perhaps temporarily from being exterminated. There are mistakes of man that cause irreversible damage from which there is just no going back, and only sincere forethought steeped in a consciousness based on genuine relatedness may save, at times perhaps even the world, from madness. We live in an era in which man can destroy humanity, the animal kingdom, Mother Earth and Father Sky. And were it not for the finality of it, man would likely repeat his own destruction. Come a day and we encounter an heir of Nebuchadnezzar's hosting a great feast with plenty of wine. Tasting the sweetness of the wine, he commands to bring the gold and the silver, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, that they might drink from. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, of iron, of wood, and of stone. However, at that very hour, the fingers of a hand appear writing upon the wall. The king saw the hand that wrote, and the color disappeared from his face, and his limbs trembled, though he did not yet know that later that night he would die. No one knew to read the encrypted proverbial writing on the wall, which said, Mene, mene, tekel, uparshin. Rembrandt, as can be seen from the writing on the wall in his famous painting of the feast, was familiar with the Talmudic view that the words were written and must be read vertically and not horizontally. So Daniel, whose name means God is my judge, was again called for to pass the judgment, interpreting the fateful writing on the wall. Mene, mene, the days of your kingdom are counted. You have been weighed, tekel, in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom is breaking down, uparshin. If the archetype of Nabu, god of wisdom and writing, who protects the boundary stone, is not consulted in individual or collective consciousness, we won't read the writing on the wall. And so, since every archetype is bipolar, the archetypal wisdom of Nabu, of the Navi, of the prophet, turns into the ominous hand that ghost-likely writes that what has not been accounted for, considered, and weighed will necessarily break down. The stones of the wall become an unprotected boundary upon which the shadows of angst write their warning. Perhaps we cannot forgo the quote from Jeremiah 51:7. Babylon has been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunk. The nations have drunk of her wine, and therefore the nations are mad. Belittled fate takes revenge on devastating destiny. And I'm going to stop here. And this is the next section that Arel goes into, as interesting as the first. Thank you very much. Hello.
Nancy, what a timely message. Oh my gosh. It really nails where we are, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
On this day, it couldn't be more exact. I think Ariel is with us. So.
I think he's with us too.
Yeah.
He
amazing what he says in this book. Well, you certainly whet our appetites for more. It is so loaded with references and ideas, such an intense outpouring of the essence of Ariel's life experience. It's amazing. Thank you so much for bringing this book to fruition. It was not finished when he passed away.
No.
Pages, put them together and crossed the T's and dotted the I's.
Mm-hmm. Looked up all the references.
Yes. Wow, it is stirring. It really, really, I can't get over the synchronicity that you gave this on this day when we are just in the midst of this type of event that is Ariel is talking about.
It is. It's a fate and destiny event that we're living through.
Yeah, really. The hubris, the whole reflection on hubris and those dreams of Nebuchadnezzar and the writing on the wall with coronavirus and with the eco crisis that we have today. And will we get it? What do you think? Will mankind wake up?
I'm not sure, Marie.
Read the writing.
I'm not sure. I know we need to read the writing on the wall. We need to pay attention to our own dreams,
Yes.
our personal dreams, our collective dreams, and really see where we are taking this fate. There is a fate, but we can change that and change our own destiny and the destiny of humankind.
Yeah. I guess that's the hope, that if we become conscious of fate, we can cooperate with it in a way that had Nebuchadnezzar gotten the message of these dreams, he would not have suffered his fate. He could have lived a wise destiny and found a different path.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Taking a different turn at the crossroads where he had a choice.
Where he had a choice, yeah.
Yeah. I guess the question is, do we still have a choice to take a different road at our crossroads?
That's the question. Yeah, as a collective. hard enough to do it as an individual, but when one faces the numbers and the degree of unwillingness to become conscious in a collective, it's overwhelming.
It is.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this. What a gift. And I hope this book gets a lot of attention. It certainly deserves it for our time, and that there will be, that it will perform a role in waking us up to what's going on at another level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. From the author, from Morel, who was faced with his fate and directed his own destiny.
Yes.
It's a wonderful message, such a personal experience for him. And it's filled with so much of him and his poetic way of expressing things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this book also is perhaps much more easy to read for more people than some of his other books. Some of his other books are more psychological or a little bit more complicated for the general audience. This one is just so gripping.
Gripping, sorry. Yeah, and it is meant for a wider public. That's what the Zurich Lecture Series are meant to do too, to open the ideas of Jungian psychology to the collective, to the public.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
I think
he
did a wonderful
does
job.
it in such a beautiful way.
Yeah.
And thank you, Murray, for hosting this lecture and the lecture series, and all you do in publishing and causing to be published all sorts of wonderful books, including this one.
We're a good team, Nancy. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And take care of yourself, and everybody out there, take care of yourselves
Yes.
during these precarious times.